Committee study of the Central Intelligence Agency's Detention and Interrogation Program is a report compiled by the bipartisan United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence about the Central Intelligence Agency's Detention and Interrogation Program and its use of torture during interrogation in U.S. government bulletins on detainees in CIA custody. The more than 6,700-page report, including 38,000 footnotes, details the history of the CIA's Detention and Interrogation Program and the committee's 20 findings and conclusions. On December 9, 2014, the SSCI released a 525-page portion that consisted of key findings and an executive summary of the full report. It took more than 5 years to complete. The full unredacted report remains classified. Today's summary: after considering various clandestine detention locations, the CIA determines that a U.S. military base is the best option. On September 17, 2001, 6 days after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, President George W. Bush signed a covert action memorandum of notification to authorize the Director of Central Intelligence to undertake operations designed to capture and detain persons who pose a continuing serious threat of violence or death to U.S. persons and interests, or who are planning terrorist activities. Although the CIA had previously been provided limited authorities to detain specific named individuals pending the issuance of formal criminal charges, the memorandum of notification provided unprecedented authorities, granting the CIA significant discretion in determining whom to detain, the factual basis for the detention, and the length of the detention. The memorandum of notification made no reference to interrogations or interrogation techniques. On September 14, 2001, 3 days before the issuance of the memorandum of notification, the Chief of Operations of the CIA's blank, based on an urgent requirement from the Chief of the Counterterrorism Center, sent an email to CIA stations in blank seeking input on appropriate locations for potential CIA detention facilities. Over the course of the next month, CIA officers considered at least 4 countries in blank and 1 in blank as possible hosts for detention facilities, and blank at least 3 proposed site locations. On September 26, 2001, senior CTC personnel, not to discuss the capture and detain authorities in the memorandum of notification. On September 28, 2001, blank CTC legal blank sent an email describing the meeting and a number of policy decisions. The email stated that covert facilities will be operated in a manner consistent with, but not pursuant to, the formal provision of appropriately comparable federal instruction for the operation of prison facilities and the incarceration of inmates held under the maximum lawful security mechanisms. Blank's email recognized the CIA's lack of experience in running detention facilities and stated that the CIA would consider acquiring cleared personnel from the Department of Defense or the Bureau of Prisons with specialized expertise to assist the CIA in operating the facilities. On September 27, 2001, CIA headquarters informed CIA stations that any future CIA detention facility would have to meet U.S. prisoner of war standards. In early November 2001, CIA headquarters further determined that any future CIA detention facility would have to meet U.S. prison standards, and that CIA detention and interrogation operations should be tailored to meet the requirements of U.S. law and the federal rules of criminal procedure, adding that specific methods of interrogation would be permissible so long as they generally comport with commonly accepted practices deemed lawful by U.S. courts. The CIA search for detention site locations was then put on hold, and an internal memorandum from senior CIA officials explained that detention at a U.S. military base outside of the United States was the best option. The memorandum thus urged the DCI to press DOD and the U.S. military at highest levels to have the U.S. military agree to host a long-term facility and have them identify an agreeable location, specifically requesting that the DCI seek to have the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay designated as a long-term detention facility. Addressing the risks associated with the CIA maintaining a detention facility, the CIA memorandum warned that as captured terrorists may be held days, months, or years, the likelihood of exposure will grow over time, and that media exposure could inflame public opinion against the host government and the U.S., thereby threatening the continued operation of the facility. The memorandum also anticipated that in a foreign country, close cooperation with the host government will entail intensive negotiations. The CIA memorandum warned that any foreign country poses uncontrollable risks that could create incidents, vulnerability to the security of the facility, bilateral problems, and uncertainty over maintaining the facility. The memorandum recommended the establishment of a short-term facility in which the CIA's role would be limited to oversight, funding, and responsibility. The CIA would contract out all other requirements to other U.S. government organizations, commercial companies, and, as appropriate, foreign governments. On December 8, 2001, DCI George Tenet delegated the management and oversight of the capture and detention authorities provided by the Memorandum of Notification to the CIA's Deputy Director for Operations, James Pavitt, and the CIA's Chief of the Counterterrorism Center, Cofer Black. The DCI also directed that all requests and approvals for capture and detention be documented in writing. On December 17, 2001, however, the DDO rescinded these requirements and issued, via a cable, blanket approval for CIA officers in blank to determine who poses the requisite continuing serious threat of violence or death to U.S. persons and interests, or who are planning terrorist activities. By March 2002, CIA headquarters had expanded the authority beyond the language of the Memorandum of Notification and instructed CIA personnel that it would be appropriate to detain individuals who might not be high-value targets in their own right, but could provide information on high-value targets. On April 7, 2003, blank, CTC Legal, blank, sent a cable to CIA stations and bases stating that at this stage in the war, we believe there is sufficient opportunity in advance to document the key aspects of many, if not most, of our capture and detain operations. Blank's cable also provided guidance as to who could be detained under the Memorandum of Notification, stating, quote, there must be an articulable basis on which to conclude that the actions of a specific person whom we propose to capture and or detain pose a continuing serious threat of violence or death to U.S. persons or interests, or that the person is planning a terrorist activity. We are not permitted to detain someone merely upon a suspicion that he or she has valuable information about terrorists or planned acts of terrorism. Similarly, the mere membership in a particular group or the mere existence of a particular familial tie does not necessarily connote that the threshold of a continuing serious threat has been satisfied, end quote. And that's the end of the summary. In an article by the Council of Foreign Relations in 2015, in response to these concerns, the George W. Bush administration made two decisions that are core to Guantanamo's controversies. The first was the selection of the site itself. The second was the determination that the Geneva Conventions did not apply to the detention of Al-Qaeda and Taliban prisoners. Much of the legal thinking behind those decisions was rebuffed by the U.S. Supreme Court years later. An early impetus for having a detention site at Guantanamo was a push by U.S. commanders in Afghanistan to offshore the task of holding enemy prisoners so that the military could focus on combat operations. In November 2001, the Bush administration considered various sites, including on the U.S. mainland, at U.S. military bases in Europe, in Pakistan, on Pacific Islands, and even on Navy ships. However, Guantanamo was the only one that fit several criteria set by administration officials. The U.S. naval base in Cuba was large enough to secure enough, and most importantly, on foreign soil, and therefore beyond the reach of any U.S. court. It was also a short flight from Washington, D.C., allowing U.S. officials to travel back and forth with relative ease. Under the terms of its long-running lease with Cuba, the U.S. government exercised complete jurisdiction and control over the land it occupied there. It did not need to obtain permission from the Fidel Castro government, with which Washington was already at odds. U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced the new detention center to the American public on December 27, 2004. The first detainees would arrive 2 weeks later.